Welcome to my math project for Cal 3. When we got this assignment, I knew there was only one thing I could talk about. That's my favorite sport in the world, drag racing. I could sit here all day and talk about the deep history, all the different cars and all the different classes that compete in the sport. But for the sake of this project, I'm going to include one. And that's the Top Fuel Dragster class. As an intro to the sport I love, drag racing, I'm going to include some clips. One being of my junior dragster that I drove a couple years ago, my 74 Nova, four-time Pro Stock champion Erica Enders, my favorite driver, two-time Pro Modified champion Stevie Fast Jackson, and the speed record holder Dom Lagana for Top Fuel.
Identical reaction times here. And Eric Anders begins to put a gap on.
So now that you've had a little bit of an intro to the sport of drag racing, I'm going to give a little history. The sport of drag racing really got its start when the car got its start. 1920s, a little bit before, but 1920 is when Henry Ford dropped the Model A, released it. So after that, people started racing these cars, and as technology, they made better cars. People would buy them and make them faster, race them. So fast forward a little bit to 1951 is when the National Hot Rod Association got its start by Wally Parks. And when it started, it had two classes. Unmodified stock, which was your run-of-the-mill car that had rules. You had to kind of keep it the way it was, but with that configuration, you had to race it and make it as fast as possible. Other class is Top Eliminator, which is basically where Top Fuel comes from. And in its early starts, they had the shape, the form of what we call a slingshot dragster, front engine dragster, where driver sits on top of the rear end, engine is in front of them. And it stayed that way for about 15, 20 years. Until about 1970, when this man, Don Garlitz, who had been dominating the sport of the Top Eliminator class since the 1960s. Well, what happened to Don is he had a major failure in the engine and transmission area. Basically, there's an explosion in the transmission and it cracked the chassis, the frame rail, and it laid him over on top of the engine. He survived, but he lost part of his right foot. That's when Don knew there needed to be a change. So we went from the front engine dragster to the rear engine dragster. And if you look, first problem that I see is your engine is behind the driver. Now that's not a problem. You don't have to worry about explosions affecting the driver as much anymore. But what it is there's more weight towards the rear of the car. So what they needed was something to keep the front end down, the way they could go as fast as possible. So that's when they started adding features like the front wing, the rear wing, not on this model, but a wheelie bar. And that's where our problem comes from, is we're going to calculate the downforce on the rear wing of this car in a perfect world at 330 miles an hour. So since we have a little bit of history and we know what's going on, we know where the Top Fuel car started and we know where it is now, we can start solving our problem, the downforce on the rear wing. So we need a downforce equation. Good thing I have one. So our downforce in this perfect world equation is going to be downforce is equal to 1/2 P. So that's going to be our air density. That can be changed due to temperature, humidity, elevation. Wherever you're at, there's tracks all over the country. Air density is going to be different everywhere you go, and every day your race is going to change. So we're going to plug in a constant. So our air density at this perfect track in the perfect world is at 0.00119. So next we're going to need area. We're going to find that. CL is the coefficient of lift. That's going to change due to the shape of the wing. I mean, it's subject to change. So we're going to plug in a 1 there, just for the perfect world. Last, we're going to need velocity. That's where the 330 miles an hour comes in. That's right about the finish line of what a car nowadays runs. So it's going to be velocity squared. We're going to change that to feet per second. So we need that area. Well, we're going to take a look at one of my old cars to get a better idea of what's going on there. So in our downforce equation, we need area. We're looking at a wing. Here's a wing. So area of this wing is going to be how long it is and how wide it is. Well, we know how long it is. That's a simple measurement. But if you look at the width, it's not just a straight flat surface. If you cut this wing in half, what are you going to see? You're going to see a curve. Just like the model, there's a curve. Well, how do we find that area? Just find the area under the curve. So now that we know what we're looking at, let's find the area under this curve. Well, the curve that we're going to be looking for the area under, the equation is going to be equal to x cubed over 400. Well, how do we find the area? We need to integrate x cubed over 400. Well, if you look at the dimensions on the wing that I found on for sale online for Top Fuel, it's going to be 48 inches wide, and it's going to be 17 inches long from front to back. 48 wide, 0 to 17 inches long. So that's going to be my x components. We'll plug that in. We're going to integrate x cubed over 400. Well, we can pull 1 over 400, so we just got x cubed, and it's just simple from there. Integrate, we get 1/4 over x to the 4th from 0 to 17th times 1 over 400. Plug in our components. We don't plug in 0 because it's not going to give us anything, so we just look at 17. 17 to the 4th is equal to 83,521. Times that by 1 over 4, it's going to give us 20,880.25. Times that by 1 over 400, that's going to give us our area under the curve is equal to 52.2. Well, now we can plug that into just a regular area problem. So we're going to multiply 48 times our 52.2. That's going to give us 2,505.6. I want it in square feet, so we're going to divide by 12 squared, or 144, and that's going to give us 17.4. So now we can plug that back into our downforce equation. So now that we know what our area is, we can plug that in to our downforce equation. Plug in our 17.4, multiply that by 0.0019. That's going to be our air density. I made an error earlier. It's actually 0.0019. Multiply that together, it's going to give us 0.03306. Our feet per second squared is going to equal 234,256. Multiply all that together, that's going to give us 7,744.5 pounds of downforce at 330 miles an hour. It's quite a bit of downforce. Next, you're going to see what happens when you have a little too much downforce.
Yep, I'm flying through the air. This is not good.
Bit of a wild ride there. So we did it. We solved our equation of how much downforce is going to be on this rear wing at 330 miles an hour. Nearly 8,000 pounds of downforce at the peak of the run, as fast as its car is going to go. So you may be wondering why. Why do we need that much, or why do we need to know? Well, when you're tuning these cars, tuners will use the curve of this wing to adjust how much downforce they need. What they're looking for is a desired wheel speed. So the amount of power these cars make, you're not going to completely hook up onto the track or it'll never run right. So what they're looking for is a desired wheel speed where you're not completely planted onto the track, but you still have traction. That way the car can move and accelerate at the speed it does. So different curves will create different amounts of downforce. So you can adjust how this wing looks, how the curve is shaped. You can flatten it out, you can curve it up, create more downforce. So that's why we have the problem we do. So that's the rear wing. You can have a lot of downforce there. You can look at the front wing, same thing, but for a different purpose. The front wing is to keep the front end on the ground. That way you don't have the blowover like we just watched. you can take the curve of that wing, or you can take the curve of these side flaps. It's very amazing machines. You can look nearly everywhere on these cars and you can find a math problem somewhere. So that's my math project, and thank you for watching.